Pardon how I sound right now, people. I am quite sick, but I have things to say and they must be said. So sickness be sickness be damned. So, if you've managed to have a peaceful weekend and haven't noticed the cluster screeching of a bunch of the, frankly, types of gamers that make the rest of us embarrassed to call ourselves gamers sometimes, take a glance towards any space online where the game Helldivers 2 is being discussed. Well, I say discussed, but like I said, with the cluster screeching and bandwagoning and hater train hopping and rage baiting and all that crap, perhaps the word I should be using is toddler level tantruming. Yeah, that sounds about right. Certainly much more apt than discussion. Now, before we start pulling at the threads of all this here, let's begin with pointing out that Helldivers 2 is already failing to hold on to its players. The active player base has plummeted, losing almost half of its players already. The game is being abandoned in droves. Now, a player base for a game will always shrink over time. That's perfectly normal. We spoke about that quite recently. But especially for a live service game like Helldivers 2, one that was supposedly popular and beloved and hyped, and you couldn't turn around in a gaming space without hearing someone make a meme about the damn thing, this is a dramatically rapid fall, astonishingly fast. Keep this figure in mind, because I'm going to come back to it to make a point. Now, all of that fussing and screeching and flailing tantrum activity, it's all about Helldivers 2 activating a feature that has been there since launch. It caused a few issues at launch with server reliability or some such thing, so they disabled the requirement until it was fixed and is now being turned back on. But to hear any Helldivers 2 player whine about it, or, non-players who just want to scream about the new popular thing to scream about, you'd think this was some kind of megalomaniac Machiavellian scheme, a secret plot by Helldivers publisher and evildoer in general Sony to bait and switch all PC gamers and force them to have a PSN account. Hello again, I am Blunty. Now, anyone who's been around here for long enough to hear me speak about any topic where Sony is even loosely involved, you'll know I'm anything but an apologist for them. Quite the opposite, actually. They burned out any goodwill and my willingness to avail them of even a small amount of benefit of the doubt a very long time ago now. But this Helldivers thing really is toppling over the edge of buffoonery, lunacy, and it is just plain embarrassing. So I must speak. And it all started at the end of last week when, via a community post on Steam, the dev announced an account linking update. Account linking plays a critical role in protecting our players and upholding the values of safety and security provided on PlayStation and PlayStation Studio games. This is our main way to protect players from griefing and abuse by enabling the banning of players that engage in that type of behavior. It also allows these players that have been banned the right to appeal. So, what's actually going on here is they're using PlayStation's account system to monitor, control, ban, and accept ban appeals game-wide across multiple platforms instead of having to do it in two separate places on two separate systems in two separate account systems, PlayStation and Steam. It solves a lot of complexities and issues and problems and inequalities and having to maintain two different kinds of systems for this kind of stuff. It seems perfectly pragmatic to me. If I was running a game like this across multiple systems, I would tie all of this stuff into a single account management system too. It just makes so many things simpler. And it's not like this is the first time this exact thing has happened. As a matter of fact, F-A-C-T, hard F, fact, it is quite common for games, online and live service games in particular, to require third-party agreements and account systems for exactly these kinds of reasons. It's very, very, very common. And anyone who imagines any other different reality has not been a gamer for decades. And in fact, since day one of Helldivers 2, it has had this requirement, clearly labeled on Steam and highlighted exactly where it always is for every single game sold on Steam that has this exact same requirement. This is not a bait and switch. As I mentioned in the opening, at launch, this caused some stability issues. At launch, things were a bit rocky, so the fastest solution to that, to get people playing, was to just turn it off. And you can see these issues reflected in the review scores in the first little bit after launch. The game was rocky, it was having lots of problems, people were delivering negative scores. After they worked around it by turning the system off for a while, the review scores suddenly got better because the problems went away. But now that issue has been fixed, so they're not introducing this requirement to something new to spring on players, they're simply turning it back on so they can go into a single account system to manage the player base properly and keep people safe. But to hear any Screecher whine about it, you'd imagine it was a sneaky bait and switch sprung upon the player base with no warning at all, and it's simply not true. It's never been true. This system was always the plan. It was just broken at first, so they turned it off so they could fix it. You will also catch people screaming about how Helldivers 2 is being taken away from players after purchase. Even some people who I have a ton of respect for, who I consider extremely smart people, have been caught up in this misinformation. Wendell, no, don't. Please, mate. I've met you in person. I know for a fact you are way smarter than me. Don't fall for this. It's not true. Now, players whose countries do not have native PSN accounts, because it is not a truly global system, are not having the game taken away from them if they've already purchased it. It's not true. While it is true that as of today, Helldivers 2 has been delisted from Steam in a bunch of these countries, delisting is not the same thing as having access to the game removed or the game just magically deleted from your library. That's not how this works. In fact, anyone who has already purchased the game can still play it just fine. Still more people are screaming about being locked out of their game tomorrow when the requirement is activated. Again, this is not true. Not true. The original announcement, if they had bothered to read it, instead of reacting to people reacting to this, as of May 6th, all new Helldiver 2 players on Steam will be required to connect their Steam account to a PlayStation Network account. The keyword here is new players. All new Helldiver 2 players. And this is why unsupported PSN countries are currently delisted, so new players from countries with unsupported PSN account systems cannot have new players for the moment, causing that issue. Current players, the announcement continued, on Steam will start to see the mandatory login from May 30th and will be required to have a linked Steam and PlayStation Network account by June the 4th. So by the end of the month, they'll be starting to roll this out as a mandatory login, as it was always intended to be, I shall remind you. And that is plenty of time to simply make a PSN account, which is very fast to do, very easy to do, and very painless to do. And sure, some people are getting pissy about even that, moving the goalposts again, claiming that, they worry about privacy or something, having to have another account with all their private information given to Sony. I call them disingenuous when they're saying that, trying to imagine that only Sony has privacy concerns with handing over your personal information to an account system while maintaining accounts all over social media in the places where you're whining about this. And surely with other game publishers as well, which already have requirements like this to play the games you've already been playing for years and years and years, please stop. I see right through you as if you are made of glass. This is not an honest thing you are saying. And anyone with even 4 functioning brain cells connected together can see right through you as well. Then you've got people like this uninformed dingbat whose post originally brought much of the dumbest possible takes about this to my attention. They claim that making a PSN account for a country you don't live in is a TOS violation, and that's correct. It is a TOS violation, but I challenge you to find examples of people who have had account bans for exclusively this behavior. I'm going to tell you a personal story now. When the PlayStation Vita released, it wasn't a worldwide thing, as was pretty common back in those days. Same kind of thing happened with Nintendo's handhelds as well. They often released in Japan first and then rolled out worldwide, USA and then Australia and then a few other places, blah, blah, blah. So the Vita hit Japan first. And as a gamer and a content creator talking about games and game hardware and stuff, I indulged myself and imported one, so I could be among the first to explore what was, at least then, an exciting product. And on that device, which I had no trouble purchasing from an importer, I had made a Japanese PSN account. Very, very easy. A little bit of a language barrier, but there are guides to walk you through it. It's very simple. Also, a little later, I had need of a USA PSN account, in addition to my own Aussie one. And all 3 of these accounts, at one point, lived simultaneously on this one device. So I didn't go to any lengths whatsoever to disguise the fact that I was using multiple region accounts on a single device in a single location. All of these accounts, by the way, are still active and functional to this day. All of these years later, none of them were ever banned. Also, it's a well-known workaround that gamers have been using for the entire existence of systems like PSN in its modern form. Every single time there is a game release for something especially popular or highly anticipated on consoles, where the release time of said game is on a global rollout locked to, say, local time zone midnight or something like that, sometimes midnight, 9 a.m., doesn't really matter, but, local time zone release, people in late time zones, like the USA, for example, can and have and continue to register Xbox and PSN accounts and whatnot for Australia or New Zealand, where we get to midnight first. Auckland, New Zealand, for example, is fully 16 hours ahead of New York, and an extra 16 hours to play a game you've been dying to play. For many gamers, it's worthwhile spending 10 minutes to set up a foreign PSN account so you can play that lovely game early and hop in on the bandwagon. Streamers and content creators especially continually do this because having earlier access to the game lets you make content about that game earlier, which lets you ride the hype train more efficiently. I've never had to worry about that because, well, I don't know if you've noticed, but I am Australian. But there are lots of USA-based content creators who routinely do this on hot new games that have regionally timed release schedules. And never once have I heard of any of them, high-profile streamer or just ordinary dude, be banned for this behavior. Even if this is in the terms of service. Why? Well, because Sony don't actually care about any of this. This requirement in the terms of service is therefore legal arse covering in compliance with local laws and regulations of various countries. It's there because it has to be there to cover their own butts. Sony have never ever once given a single shit about this. You can make a PSN account for every region in the world and use them for whatever you like, and they don't care. It's not worth their time chasing this crap down. It is a minor inconvenience at best having to spend the time it takes to enjoy a coffee in order to set up a new PSN account and pretend to be from a supported country to work around whatever issue this might cause you in whatever game. The only issue would ever be the requirement to have a valid local payment system for the country of choice if you want to buy something from the storefront. But as Helldivers 2 players on PC are not being asked to buy anything through the PSN account system, that's not an issue here either, at all. It will never be. All of this hasn't stopped people from flying off the handle based on misinformation, misunderstanding, and just plain ignorance. And they've pointed their tantrums at review bombing on Steam, because in all their impotence, that's all they feel they can do. A protest action that, as far as I can recall, has never once actually done anything or caused a change at any point in history, except for making dumb people feel smug when they point to it. Look what we did, we review bombed, look at the big red line, woo! So, let's come back to the things that actually matter to game publishers. The player numbers. With all of this outrage, with all of this screaming, with all this fury and tantrums, you'd think the game would be rapidly being abandoned by its players in protest. So, remember when I showed you that player number statistic near the start of this video? Numbers pulled directly from Steam's own API, so we know they are extremely reliable, very, very accurate. Well, when you actually look at the time frame, it turns out that almost all of that plummeting player numbers has happened well before any of this current piss-pants carry-on even started. The game has been hemorrhaging players on a regular basis since 2 weeks after launch. In fact, the current numbers for the last week, and remember, for half of this presented time frame now, people have been screeching in rage and spamming review bombs in protest. Well, guess what? No sign of all of any kind of player protest where it actually matters, the player numbers. And for a monetized, live service games, player numbers are everything to the suits. So if you want to make a difference, if you want to make people making the decisions notice, this is where you have to make the change. But Helldivers 2 players have not been doing that. The pattern of active players is basically entirely unchanged from the preceding weeks and even last month. Helldiver 2 players are full of crap, man. They scream and thrash and protest and whine, but it seems basically none of them are willing to actually stand by their own words. Me personally, when a brand or individual game does something I feel personally opposed to, passionately so, you know what I do? I stop engaging with that product. I walk away from it. I've done it many times over the years. One recent example that springs to mind, last year, Paleo released, a cozy, cutesy MMO thing. I was pretty hyped for it. I'd been watching it for years throughout its development. I played it in closed beta. I streamed it on release. I engaged with the community actively. I made content about it. But when it became undeniably clear just how sleazy and in fact dishonest they were being about how the game was monetized and how they intend to move forward with that, I stopped covering it. I stopped streaming it, and I stopped playing it entirely. I have not booted up that game even once since I walked away from it in protest of this behavior. Which is a pity, because I actually did enjoy the gameplay loop this game offers, but I am someone with, personal integrity. Unlike these Helldiver 2 players, who have apparently no integrity. If you have such a huge problem with the game's management and decisions, and the activation of PSN account requirements, activation, not addition, by the way, requirements that have been clearly labeled since pre-release right there on the purchase page, you can see them before you ever click the buy button, then here's what you do to make your voice actually heard and have a chance at making a difference. Stop playing. Stand by your word. Have some integrity. Stop playing the game en masse. Make the play numbers plummet suddenly and undeniably in reaction to this decision. If the play numbers just continue to slowly dwindle away like they have been over the last several weeks, we'll know for sure that you guys don't actually care about this, you just want to screech about it, because you're still playing the game, and that's what the publisher will see. Well, they're making a lot of noise, but look at that. Play numbers have the same pattern as they've had for a while now. Why should we change anything when this decision hasn't actually affected anything about the game? That's what the suits will see. The only way you can change your mind is by leaving the game immediately, en masse. So, let's watch the player numbers this coming month. If we don't see a huge dive kick in when the PSN requirement starts triggering as mandatory, we will all know you are all full of shit and you need to shut up. Because you are pointless and meaningless screeching babies, toddlers throwing a tantrum. Stand by your word, or shut the fuck up. Those are your two options. Thank you for watching. I am Blunty, and I will catch you next time. Thank you as always to the patrons scrolling up above there.